The digital clock on the dashboard of the Peugeot 309 reads 2012. From his position across the street, the agent known as Spotter 1 watches the rain slick the cobblestones of Avenue de la Renaissance. His focus is absolute, a pinprick of intensity in the gray Brussels evening. He is monitoring the entrance to apartment building 2B. For 3 weeks, this has been his world. He knows the schedule of every resident, the sound of the faulty lobby door, the precise moment the concierge switches on the hallway lights. Inside his ear, a tiny receiver is silent. It has been silent for hours. This is the nature of the work. 99% oppressive boredom, 1% pure terror. The protocol is clear. If the target, Dr. Gerald Bull, is not back by 21 hours, the operation is scrubbed. The risk of random encounters increases exponentially with every passing minute. At 2013, the silence breaks, not with a voice, but with 2 distinct clicks in his earpiece. The signal from Spotter 2, positioned in a delivery van a block away. A vehicle has turned onto the avenue. It matches the target's profile, a dark blue Mercedes 280 SE. Spotter 1 raises his binoculars, the optics cutting through the drizzle. The license plate matches. It's him. He keys his own transmitter twice. The signal is relayed instantly to the 2-man team on the 6th floor landing inside Building 2B, and to the mission controller, Yair, monitoring from a sterile safe house 2 kilometers away. The final phase is active. The Mercedes pulls into its usual parking spot. The driver's side door opens. Gerald Bull emerges. He is 62 years old, but he moves with a heavy-set impatience. In one hand, he carries a worn leather briefcase. In the other, a plastic bag of groceries. Milk, bread, a tin of coffee. The mundane details of a life about to be extinguished. Bull locks his car and starts towards the building's entrance. Everything is proceeding exactly as rehearsed dozens of times in simulations. And then, a variable, a new element not in any plan. The door to the adjacent building, 2A, opens. A young girl, no older than 7, runs out onto the sidewalk, chasing a small red ball. She is directly in the line of sight between Bull and the entrance. Yair, the controller, sees this anomaly relayed from a micro camera hidden in a lamppost. His heart rate remains steady, a trained response, but his mind calculates the cascading possibilities. A witness, a scream, a distraction that could give the target a single, life-saving second of warning. The protocol is rigid. No collateral witnesses, especially not a child. A single click from Yair's transmitter would mean abort. The team would melt away. Weeks of planning, millions of dollars, and a threat of existential magnitude would remain active. The window to neutralize the threat is closing. Yair has less than 5 seconds to make the call. Bull is 20 meters from the door. The girl is 10 meters from him, laughing as she chases the ball. Inside the 6th floor hallway, the shooter, Nadav, feels the cold metal of the suppressed Beretta 7.65mm pistol in his hand. His partner, the lookout, Aaron, watches the stairwell indicator, his body a coiled spring. They have heard the clicks. They know the target is approaching. They do not know about the girl. They are blind, waiting only for the final signal. 4 seconds. Yair's thumb hovers over the transmitter. Bull continues his unhurried walk. 3 seconds. The girl's mother appears in the doorway of 2A. She calls her daughter's name. The girl scoops up her ball and runs back inside. The doorway is clear. 2 seconds. Yair's thumb presses down firmly. One long, sustained tone is sent to the team. The signal. Go. The operation is live. Gerald Bull reaches for his keys, then notices the heavy oak door to his building is slightly ajar. A flicker of annoyance crosses his face. The concierge was getting lazy. He pushes it open and steps into the lobby, out of the rain, out of sight. He is now in the kill box. The decision made in that 2-second window in Brussels was the culmination of 18 months of escalating panic within the highest echelons of Israeli intelligence. To understand the execution of Gerald Bull, you have to understand the weapon he was building. And to understand the weapon, you have to understand the two men at the heart of the project, the creator and his patron. The creator was Gerald Vincent Bull, a prodigy, a genius in the field of ballistics. Born in Ontario, Canada in 1928, he was the youngest person to ever receive a PhD from the University of Toronto, a feat he accomplished at the age of 22. His obsession was singular, firing projectiles into space using cannons, not rockets. He saw rockets as inefficient, overly complex. A gun, he argued, was a model of brutal simplicity and power. In the 1960s, with joint funding from Canada and the United States, he masterminded Project HARP, the High Altitude Research Project. From a launch site in Barbados, Bull and his team used a modified 16-inch naval cannon to fire projectiles to the edge of the atmosphere, reaching an altitude of 180 kilometers. It was a world record that stood for decades. But the project was canceled. Cold War funding shifted to NASA and the glamour of rocket-based missile programs. Bull was left adrift, a brilliant mind with an obsolete obsession. He privatized, forming the Space Research Corporation, or SRC. He took his genius to the open market. His most significant client became the apartheid regime of South Africa. Bull designed the G5 howitzer for them, a 150mm artillery piece, with a range that was, at the time, unparalleled. It was a masterpiece of ordnance engineering, and it was a flagrant violation of international arms embargoes. In 1980, Bull was arrested, tried, and convicted in the United States for illegal arms trafficking. He served 6 months in a federal prison. The experience radicalized him. He felt betrayed by the Western governments he had once served. When he was released, he was a man for hire, his patriotism erased, his loyalty for sale to the highest bidder. The patron was Saddam Hussein al-Tikriti, the president of Iraq. By 1988, the bloody 8-year war with Iran had ended in a stalemate. Iraq was victorious, but financially ruined, owing billions to its Arab neighbors. Saddam's response was not austerity, but aggression and ambition. His chemical weapons program had been proven brutally effective against Iranian troops and his own Kurdish population. His nuclear program, though set back by the Israeli airstrike on the Osirak reactor in 1981, was secretly being rebuilt. But Saddam needed a new kind of weapon, a strategic deterrent that couldn't be easily intercepted. Israeli and American missile defense technology was advancing. A conventional ballistic missile launch would trigger immediate alarms, providing crucial minutes of warning. Saddam wanted a weapon that was deniable, untraceable until the moment of impact. He wanted a gun, a very, very big gun. In 1988, their paths crossed. Introduced by intermediaries in the murky world of international arms dealers, the embittered genius and the megalomaniacal dictator found they had a common goal. Saddam offered Bull unlimited funding, political protection, and the chance to finally build the cannon of his dreams. Bull offered Saddam a weapon that could hold his enemies, primarily Israel and a resurgent Iran, in a state of permanent terror. The project was codenamed Project Babylon. It was a plan of breathtaking audacity. It involved the construction of a series of cannons, each larger than the last. The initial prototype, Baby Babylon, was a scaled-down version with a 350 mm bore, built on a hillside in Iraq for testing. The final weapon, Big Babylon, was to be a monster, 156 meters long with a bore of 1 full meter. It would be fixed in place, angled at 45 degrees, buried into the side of a mountain. Its barrel alone would weigh over 1,500 tons. Firing a multi-stage rocket-assisted projectile, its theoretical range was over 1,000 kilometers. Tel Aviv, Tehran, Riyadh, all would be within its reach. It could deliver a conventional explosive payload of 600 kilograms, or, more terrifyingly, a chemical or biological warhead. It was the ultimate artillery piece, a strategic weapon disguised as a cannon. For Israel, this was the nightmare scenario. Their entire defense doctrine was built on early warning. The Supergun offered none. A projectile fired from Iraq would exit the atmosphere, travel through the vacuum of near space, and re-enter over its target at hypersonic speeds. The flight time would be mere minutes. There would be no rocket plume to detect, no heat signature for satellites to track until the final, terminal phase. It was a first-strike weapon of terrifying potential. Leading the response to this threat was Shabtai Shavit, who became the director of Mossad in 1989. Shavit was a pragmatist, a proponent of modernizing Israel's intelligence apparatus. He favored surgical operations, technological dominance, and a doctrine of absolute prevention when it came to existential threats. His predecessor had initiated the file on Bull, but it was on Shavit's desk that the file grew from a curiosity to a top priority threat assessment. The field commander tasked with translating Shavit's directive into action was a man known only as Yair. Yair was a legend within the Qaidan, Mossad's elite unit responsible for targeted killings. His defining skill was not aggression, but an obsessive, almost pathological attention to detail. He was known for planning operations with hundreds of contingencies, for demanding his operatives know not just their own roles, but the roles of everyone on the team. His most lauded success was not an assassination, but the exfiltration of a compromised agent from deep within Syrian military intelligence, an operation that involved 3 border crossings, 4 changes of identity, and a rendezvous with an Israeli submarine. He was a planner, a master of the quiet, unseen move. He was the perfect man to hunt Gerald Bull. The genesis of the mission to stop Project Babylon began not with a single dramatic discovery, but with a slow, painstaking accumulation of disparate data points. Mossad's global network of Qatsas, case officers, and Sayanim, volunteer helpers, began to report a series of strange industrial orders. A steel foundry in Sheffield, England, Sheffield Forge Masters, received an enormous order from Iraq for high-pressure steel tubing for an oil pipeline. The specifications were unusual. The seamless pipes were exceptionally long and had a wall thickness far exceeding any commercial application. In Spain, a company called Consen received an order for massive steel billets. In Switzerland, a precision engineering firm was contracted to build enormous hydraulic buffers. In Belgium, Bull's own company, SRC, was coordinating the logistics. Individually, these orders were explainable. But Mossad's powerful analysis software, a precursor to modern big data systems, began to flag a pattern. The orders were all channeled through a web of front companies. The technical specifications, when cross-referenced, did not point to a pipeline. They pointed to the component parts of an impossibly large cannon barrel. The name Gerald Bull kept appearing in the margins of shipping manifests and financial transfers. His file was pulled from the Mossad archives. His work on Project HARP, his conviction for arms dealing with South Africa, his known anti-Israel sentiments. The picture snapped into focus. An initial diplomatic approach was made. Israeli intelligence discreetly shared their findings with their counterparts at MI6 in Britain and the CIA in the United States. The response was lukewarm. The evidence was circumstantial. The companies involved were creating jobs. There was a reluctance to disrupt lucrative trade with Iraq based on Israeli fears. Frustrated, Mossad escalated. Their operatives began a campaign of low-level sabotage and intimidation. A warehouse in Greece holding components for the gun's breech block mysteriously burned down. A senior executive at one of the manufacturing firms found a dead canary on his doorstep, a classic warning. These were pinpricks. They caused delays and cost overruns, but they didn't stop the project. In March 1990, British customs officials, acting on a tip from a joint MI6 Mossad source, seized 8 sections of the giant barrel at the port of T-Sport. The story became public. Project Babylon was exposed to the world. Saddam was defiant, claiming the pipes were for his petrochemical industry. But for Mossad, the seizure was a failure. It was only a fraction of the total components. The project was still alive. More importantly, the brain behind it was still active. A consensus formed at the highest level of the Israeli government. The components were replaceable. The factories could be rebuilt. But the genius of Gerald Bull was unique. The project lived and died with him. The mission was no longer about sabotage. It was about elimination. Director Shavit gave the order. The file was passed to Yair. The objective was simple. Gerald Bull was to be neutralized, permanently. The operational plan, codenamed Operation Hammer, was built on one of Yair's core principles: exploit the target's psychology. Weeks of initial surveillance confirmed what Bull's profile suggested. He was a creature of habit, driven by an arrogance that bordered on a feeling of invincibility. He believed his intellect placed him above the grubby world of espionage. He felt protected by his powerful Iraqi clients. This was his critical error. His predictability would be his undoing. Yair's plan had 3 phases: insertion and surveillance, technical preparation, and execution. Phase 1 began 6 weeks before the final night. 8 Kaidan agents, divided into 3 cells, entered Belgium. They arrived separately from different cities, using a mix of Canadian, British, and German passports. One cell, the logistics team, arrived first. Posing as international art dealers, a man and a woman, they rented a spacious, nondescript apartment in the Ottergem district of Brussels, a 15-minute drive from Bull's residence. This would be the safe house, the operational nerve center. They paid 6 months' rent in cash. The apartment was swept for bugs, then outfitted with a suite of sophisticated electronics, encrypted communication gear, video monitors, and a small, soundproofed workshop for modifying equipment. The second cell was the surveillance team. 3 agents, 2 men and a woman, who would do the high-risk work of physically tracking the target. They checked into separate mid-range hotels, posing as tourists and a graduate student researching European architecture. Their goal was to build a complete pattern of life for Gerald Bull. They tracked him from his apartment to his office at 180-182 Rue de Stahl. They noted he drove himself, without a security detail. They followed him to his favorite restaurant, a small Italian bistro where he always sat at the same corner table. They identified his mistress, a Belgian secretary, and tracked her movements as well. They documented every routine, every deviation. They discovered a crucial habit. When Bull returned home, he often found his apartment door already unlocked, left that way by his cleaning lady or his mistress who had visited earlier. He had grown accustomed to it, simply pushing the door open without first using his key. This single detail, this tiny lapse in security, became the linchpin of the entire execution plan. The third cell was the action team. Nadav, the shooter, Iran, the lookout, and a third agent, the driver. They were the last to arrive, entering the country just 10 days before the target date. They remained isolated, their faces unknown to the other teams, communicating only with Yair through encrypted messages. Phase 2, technical preparation, ran in parallel. The technology deployed was a blend of off-the-shelf components modified for clandestine use. Communication was paramount. The teams used a custom-built burst transmission device. A lengthy report could be typed into a small keypad, compressed, and then transmitted as a 0.7-second pulse of digital noise across a rapidly changing sequence of radio frequencies. For an eavesdropper, it was indistinguishable from random static. But it had a weakness. Its power source drained quickly, and each transmission, however brief, carried a minute risk of triangulation. Yair enforced strict communication discipline. Transmissions only at prearranged times from moving vehicles to minimize the risk. The surveillance gear included a long-range microphone concealed within a briefcase. It could pick up a conversation from 100 meters away, but it was highly directional and useless in the Brussels rain. More effective were the micro cameras. One, the size of a shirt button, was painstakingly installed in a public lamppost across from Bull's apartment building by an agent posing as a city maintenance worker in the dead of night. It gave them a live feed of the building's entrance, but its fixed position was a limitation. An attempt to plant an audio bug inside Bull's apartment itself ended in a near disaster. The agent assigned the task, disguised as a telephone repairman, was about to enter the building when Bull's mistress made an unscheduled arrival. The agent was forced to abort, walking calmly away, his heart pounding with adrenaline. The failure meant they would have no eyes or ears inside the apartment on the night of the operation. They would be blind to what was happening on the other side of the door. The weapon was a subject of intense debate. The Kidon's standard-issue weapon was a .22 caliber Beretta Model 71, prized for its small size and reliability. But for this operation, Yair chose a slightly larger caliber, the 7.6 mm in a different model of Beretta. The reasoning was forensic. The .22 was too closely associated with Mossad. The 7.65 mm was a common European caliber, used in dozens of handguns. The ammunition sourced for the mission was of mixed European origin, making it virtually untraceable. The silencer was a masterpiece of engineering, a custom job from Mossad's own weapons lab. It wasn't the whisper-quiet device of movies. It was designed to change the sound of the gunshot, to make the sharp crack sound like a dull thud, a sound that would be lost in the ambient noise of an apartment building. The most critical pieces of technology, however, were the forged documents. The passports were not mere forgeries. They were recreations. Mossad had obtained batches of blank passports through covert means. The paper stock, the watermarks, the binding threads were all genuine. The art was in the details, matching the exact ink composition used by the Canadian government in a specific year, replicating the precise pressure and heat of the lamination machine, and creating a believable pattern of entry and exit stamps. A single flawed detail under the scrutiny of a vigilant border guard could unravel everything. The meticulously constructed plan began to fray just 8 days before the scheduled execution. The first major complication arrived in the form of Iraqi counterintelligence. Bull was not just an employee, he was a prized asset. Saddam's intelligence service, the Mukhabarat, had a discreet presence in Brussels tasked with protecting him. One of the Mossad surveillance agents, Daniel, was sitting in a cafe near Bull's office, observing the building's entrance. He had been there for 2 hours, blending in, reading a newspaper. A man in a dark overcoat sat down at a nearby table. He ordered nothing. He simply sat and stared directly at Daniel for a full 15 seconds. The man's gaze was flat, professional. It was a look Daniel had been trained to recognize. He had been made. Following protocol, Daniel calmly folded his newspaper, paid for his coffee, and left the cafe. He did not return to his hotel. He walked for 3 blocks, taking a series of pre-planned turns to detect a tail. He confirmed he was being followed by 2 men. He ducked into a crowded subway station, boarded a train, and disembarked at the next stop just as the doors were closing. He was in the clear, but his cover was blown. Within hours, Daniel was exfiltrated from Belgium via land route to Germany. The surveillance team was now down a member, but the more significant damage was psychological. The Iraqis were alert. The operation's secrecy, its most vital component, was potentially compromised. Yair convened an emergency meeting with his team leaders in the Ottergem safe house. The tension was palpable. The logical move was to abort the mission, pull the entire team out, and start again in a few months. But intelligence from Tel Aviv was grim. A new shipment of massive, custom-built hydraulic buffers for the Supergun's recoil system was scheduled to depart from a factory in Spain in 2 weeks. Project Babylon was accelerating. There was no time to waste. Yair made a high-risk decision. Instead of pulling back, he would press forward, but with a new layer of deception. He activated a 2-man ghost team that had been held in reserve in Amsterdam. Their mission was not to conduct surveillance, but to be seen. They were to operate clumsily, to make basic tradecraft mistakes. They rented a car with a license plate that was easily traceable to a rental agency. They followed one of Bull's known Iraqi associates, but did so overtly, staying too close, making it obvious they were conducting surveillance. The goal was to make the Mukhabarat believe this amateurish team was the full extent of the threat. It was a calculated gamble to draw the enemy's attention, to make them focus on the decoy, while Yair's professional team continued their quiet, methodical work around Bull's residence. The ruse worked. Iraqi counterintelligence resources were diverted to tracking the ghost team across Brussels. But just as Yair and his team adapted to this new threat, a second, more unpredictable one emerged. While monitoring radio traffic, Mossad signals intelligence analyst intercepted a series of encrypted transmissions near the Sheffield Forgemasters factory in the UK. The transmission's signature, its length, frequency hopping pattern, and encryption type was familiar. It belonged to Britain's MI6. The British were running their own investigation. This was confirmed 2 days later, when the Mossad surveillance team in Brussels identified a 2-man MI6 team observing the same street as them. The British agents were professionals, but their techniques, the specific model of rental car, their method of rotating observation posts, were known to Mossad. A silent, dangerous dance began on the streets of Uccle. The 2 spy agencies were now circling the same target, completely unaware of each other's true intentions. For Yair, this was a nightmare scenario. MI6's primary goal was likely intelligence gathering or, at most, disruption of the supply chain. If they made a move, if they tried to approach Bull or alert the Belgian authorities, they could inadvertently blow the entire Mossad operation. The carefully constructed kill box would be compromised. The clock was now ticking faster than ever. The window of opportunity, which had seemed to be weeks long, had suddenly shrunk to a matter of days. The original plan had included several lower-risk options, such as targeting Bull on one of his frequent international trips. But with MI6 in play, the risk of waiting was now greater than the risk of acting. Yair made the final decision. The operation had to happen immediately. It had to happen in Brussels. It had to be at Bull's apartment, the location they had studied with microscopic precision. He sent a one-word coded message to Tel Aviv. Executing. The final preparations began. The action team studied a 2-scale replica of the 6th-floor hallway, built in a warehouse on the outskirts of the city. They rehearsed the movements 100 times, choreographing every step, every turn, every line of fire, until it was muscle memory. The plan was no longer a theoretical exercise. It was a freight train set in motion, and nothing could be allowed to derail it. The afternoon of Thursday, March 20, 1990, was cold and damp. A persistent drizzle fell over Brussels, casting the city in a muted, gray light. At 17 hours, Yair's teams moved to their final positions. Spotter 1 took his post in a rented room overlooking the avenue. Spotter 2 was in a parked van, appearing to be making repairs. The action team, Nadav and Iran, entered the apartment building lobby using a key they had copied from the concierge's ring 2 weeks prior. They took the stairs, not the elevator, to avoid any chance encounters. On the 6th floor, they found their positions. Nadav, the shooter, stood in a small alcove near Bull's apartment door. Aaron, the lookout, positioned himself at the end of the hall, with a view of both the elevator and the stairwell door. They were now inside, committed. The wait began. 17:30 came and went. Bull, normally punctual, was late leaving his office. In the safe house, Yair monitored the silence. On the street, the spotters watched and waited. In the hallway, Nadav and Aaron stood motionless, their breathing slow and controlled. Every creak of the old building, every distant siren, was a potential threat. 18:15. A new piece of information. Spotter 3, positioned near Bull's office, reported that Bull's secretary had just left the building. But she did not follow her usual route home. She went to a nearby bar, an unscheduled deviation. Was it a coincidence? Or had the plan been compromised? Was it a trap? Yair had to assess the probability. The secretary had no known security links. The deviation was likely personal, random. He decided to hold the team in place, but the tension had ratcheted up another notch. 19 Aisir. The sun had set. The hallway on the 6th floor was dark, lit only by a single, low-wattage bulb. Aaron's eyes strained to watch the stairwell. Nadav felt the grip of his pistol becoming slick with sweat. He wiped his palm on his trousers. 19:45. Yair made a command decision. He sent a single coded click to Iran's earpiece, the signal for the cutoff time. If the target did not appear by 21 Zag, the mission was scrubbed for the night. The risks of a prolonged stay inside the building were becoming untenable. The odds of a resident returning home, a chance encounter, were increasing with every minute. 2011. Hope was fading. The team was mentally preparing to withdraw. Then, 2 sharp clicks from Spotter 1. A vehicle. The Mercedes. It was him. Yair felt a surge of adrenaline, quickly suppressed. He relayed the signal. On the 6th floor, Nadav and Iran heard the clicks. They shifted their weight, muscles tensing. The waiting was over. 2013. Bull parked his car. He was alone. He was carrying his briefcase and groceries. Perfect. He was behaving exactly as his profile predicted. A man coming home from a day's work. 2014. The moment of the unexpected variable. The neighbor's child with the red ball. Yair's finger on the abort signal. The mother's call. The child disappearing. The path clearing. Yair sends the sustained go tone. It is happening. Now. 2015. Gerald Bull pushes open the main lobby door. He walks to the elevator and presses the button. Inside the elevator car, he is hidden from view, but the floor indicator in the hallway is visible to Iran. It begins to climb. 1, 2, 3. Iran sends a series of soft clicks to Nadav. 4, 5, 6. The elevator shudders to a halt. The doors slide open. 2015-35. Bull steps out. He turns right toward his apartment, his back momentarily to Nadav's position. Iran watches the elevator doors close in the stairwell. All clear. Bull walks the final few meters to his front door. He reaches into his coat pocket for his keys, then stops. He sees the door is already slightly ajar. He sighs in frustration. The cleaning lady again. He pushes the door inward. 2015-48. As the door swings open, it reveals Nadav, who has stepped out from the alcove. Bull's eyes widen, not in fear, but in surprised recognition. It's the last expression he will ever have. Before he can process the situation, before he can even open his mouth to speak, Nadav raises the Beretta. The custom silencer makes 2 dull, wet coughing sounds. Foot. Foot. 2 7.65mm rounds enter the back of Bull's skull at the base of the neck, severing the brainstem. His body goes limp, collapsing forward into the doorway of his apartment without a sound. 2015-55. Following protocol, Nadav steps over the body and fires 3 more rounds into Bull's head and torso. The insurance shots. It is a clinical, practiced motion. He then reaches into his own pocket, pulls out a white envelope, and places it in the breast pocket of Bull's overcoat. The envelope contains $20,000 in used bills. The misdirection, the seed of a false narrative. 2016-10. Nadav turns and walks back down the hallway. He doesn't run. Aaron joins him. They move smoothly to the stairwell door, open it, and begin their descent. They take their time, their footsteps measured, calm. 2018, Nahron. They exit the building through a rear service door into a back alley. They walk 2 blocks north, where their getaway driver is waiting in a Citroën. They get in. The car pulls away from the curb and melts into the Brussels traffic. 2025. From a public payphone 10 kilometers away, Yair receives a single-click signal from the action team. They are clear of the primary zone. One by one, over the next hour, each member of every cell sends a similar confirmation. The team is dissolving, each agent proceeding to their individual exfiltration point. Operation Hammer is complete. The body of Gerald Bull was discovered hours later by a concerned neighbor who saw his apartment door standing open. The Brussels police arrived to a scene that was both brutal and strangely clean. 5 gunshot wounds, executed with surgical precision. No signs of forced entry. No witnesses. Crucially, no shell casings. The shooter had collected them. The only clue was the envelope containing $20,000. The initial theory, floated by police and seized upon by the media, was a professional hit related to a shady business deal. The money suggested a transaction gone wrong. For the first critical 48 hours, investigators pursued leads into Bull's complex financial network, a wild goose chase intentionally laid by Yair. The news of Bull's death sent shockwaves through the international intelligence and arms communities. Speculation was rampant. Had Saddam killed him to prevent him from defecting? Had the Iranians, still smarting from the war, finally caught up with him? Had a rival arms dealer eliminated the competition? The name Mossad was whispered, but there was no evidence, no proof. It was just another theory in a sea of them. In Tel Aviv, there was no celebration, just a quiet, clinical assessment. The mission was a success. The team was exfiltrated without a single loss. Within weeks, the tangible results began to manifest. Project Babylon, deprived of its visionary and driving force, ground to a halt. The intricate network of suppliers, engineers, and financiers fell into disarray. The complex physics and engineering problems that Bull had solved in his head were now insurmountable obstacles. The various European companies involved, suddenly under intense media and government scrutiny, denied any knowledge of the project's true military purpose. The giant steel tubes seized in Britain became museum pieces, monuments to a madman's ambition. Other components rusted in warehouses across Europe and Iraq. The threat of the Supergun, the weapon that promised to hold Israel under a permanent shadow of fear, was gone. The tactical objective had been achieved. But the true legacy of Operation Hammer was not simply the elimination of one man or one weapon system. The final, crucial revelation of the mission's value would only become clear in the months and years that followed. During the long weeks of surveillance in Brussels, Mossad hadn't just been watching Gerald Bull. They had been mapping his entire universe. They bugged his office, copied documents from his briefcase during a staged traffic stop, and downloaded the contents of his company's computers. They built a detailed schematic of Project Babylon's procurement network. Every shell company, every bank account, every middleman, every corrupt official. This intelligence, at first, seemed relevant only to the Supergun project. But as Mossad analysts cross-referenced the names and accounts with intelligence from other operations, a stunning picture emerged. The network Bull was using to build his cannon was the very same network Saddam Hussein was using for all of his weapons of mass destruction. The same Swiss bank was financing the purchase of centrifuges for the nuclear program. The same German chemical supplier was providing precursor chemicals for sarin gas. The same shady shipping agent in Cyprus was arranging transport for both missile components and biological growth medium. The assassination of Gerald Bull was not just about stopping a gun. It was a key that unlocked the secrets of Saddam's entire WMD apparatus. The intelligence gathered during Operation Hammer became the foundation for a decade of covert Israeli operations to disrupt and dismantle Iraq's most dangerous programs. It provided the targeting data for future sabotage operations and the intelligence that was eventually shared with Western allies in the run-up to the First Gulf War. The killing of the man was a message to any scientist who would sell their genius to a tyrant. It was a declaration that Mossad's reach was global, that there was no safe harbor. But the intelligence gathered was the true strategic victory. It was a blow from which Saddam's secret weapons programs would never fully recover. The 5 shots fired in that quiet Brussels hallway did more than end a man's life. They echoed through the hidden corridors of power, reshaped the strategic balance of the Middle East, and proved once again that in the world of espionage, a single, perfectly executed operation can be more decisive than 1,000 bombs. The gun was dead. But the map of the network it revealed was the mission's real prize.